Hello and welcome to the big picture. Pakistan President Asif Ali Zardari's pilgrimage to Ajmer Sharif, though dubbed as a private informal affair, turned out to be high on politics as well as diplomacy too. His lunch with Prime Minister Dr.Manmohan Singh and a clutch of leaders on both sides and their one-on-one meeting was keenly watched. Many issues were discussed, including all the sensitive issues concerning both the countries. There were some positives too in terms of talks on improving trade and visas and so on. But at the end of the day, the media in India at least saw it as India's assertion on the Hafiz Saeed and terrorism front, while the Pakistan media was more positive and less shrill. So is this pilgrim's progress through Delhi and Ajmer mean anything in terms of improving the trust between the two nations? The question we are asking today, has Zardari's visit reduced the trust deficit which has prevailed between the two countries, especially since the Bombay attack? To discuss this, I have with me today a distinguished panel of guests, Mr. S.Nihal Singh, a veteran editor and journalist, Mr. Baladas Ghoshal, a distinguished fellow at Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies and a former professor of JNU, Mr. Dilip Cherian, an image consultant and chairman of Perfect Relations, as well as a keen observer of Indian media and politics. And on the phone line, we will be joined by Mr. Imtiaz from Lahore in Pakistan. Mr. Alam is a veteran Pakistani journalist and also the president of South Asian Free Media Association, SAFMA. Welcome to all my guests. Let me first go to Mr. Nihal Singh. Mr. Singh, you think there has been a thaw in the relations between India and Pakistan following the visit of Mr. Zardari? If you see the Indian newspaper headlines, there is a huge lot of skepticism still.
Well, I think the importance of the visit really was the fact that he came. Obviously, it's easier to arrange top-level meetings, whether it's a cricket match, which is the excuse, or in this instance, pilgrimage. And I must compliment President Zardari for taking the initiative to make the visit, because obviously he knew if he was coming to India, he would be invited to meet the Prime Minister over lunch or whatever. As far as the question of trust deficit is concerned, it's a long-haul process. I don't think one visit is going to make a difference, but I think the important thing is that there's more frequently Indian and Pakistani leaders meet. Obviously, it will affect the atmosphere, the political mood. So that is a plus factor. I would say it is a plus factor. And I would assume that none of the really issues that were discussed were earth-shaking or unknown. I mean, it was familiar territory.
Absolutely.
So, and no great results were expected per se. But I think it's good for the mood between the two countries. It's good particularly against the background of a recent thaw, I would say, in trade relations, thanks to Pakistan seeing things in a different manner from its past postures. So I would say it's a plus factor.
Okay. Mr. Ghoshal, Mr. Nihal Singh mentioned about, arranging these kind of meetings where if there's a cricket match or this kind of a pilgrimage. Do you think it was a deliberate decision on the part of the Pakistan president to make this pilgrimage, though he had been to Ajmer Sharif in the past also? You think it was some kind of a planned affair so that it could be an excuse to meet the president, to meet the prime minister and other leaders here?
I think this was a deliberate attempt.
Yes.
I look at it from another angle as well. I think the domestic politics of Pakistan also have to be taken into consideration. You see the kind of fights that were going on between the civilians and the military.
Absolutely.
To establish their own supremacy. To my mind, I think Zardari's attempt to break the thaw with India could be an attempt to create a niche for himself.
Right.
In the political struggle.
In Pakistan.
In Pakistan itself. And also because of the kind of developments that are taking place in the last couple of months in his relationship with the United States, the pressure on Hafiz Saeed,
yes,
and things of that sort. I think taking all this into consideration, Zardari might be thinking that this could be a good opportunity to at least express his own thinking on this point. At least if he could make a niche for himself within this.
Let me go to Mr. Imtiaz Alam. Mr. Alam, if you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. See, it's very interesting what my two studio guests have said. What I want to know from you is, was this a deliberate ploy or strategy on the part of Mr. Zardari to come to India in the guise of a pilgrimage to Ajmer Sharif? One. Secondly, what kind of reactions do you see in the Pakistani media after the visit? Like today's morning newspapers and what the television channels are saying?
I think they had choreographed this visit very well, and Mr. Zardari picked up a fight with the opposition leader, Mr. Sharif, and his younger brother.
Yes.
And the media got busy with that, and he went for this visit with a lot of preparation, I know.
Right.
But without making a big media event out of it. It was, I think, perhaps a bigger media event in India.
Right.
So he was able to diffuse the expectations and the high-profile things. And what I know that he was, in fact, it started with the pilgrimage, but it culminated into a very serious move.
Right.
I'll refer 2 or 3 points.
Right.
One is, I think, after the trade liberalization, Pakistan had, this was a big shift in Pakistan's strategy.
Yes.
Not tactics. That Pakistan used to say that first Kashmir, then trade.
Right.
So now Kashmir is not being seen on the agenda, but the trade is being tackled. The second point is the Afghanistan should be and is the major concern of Pakistan and India and the other states of the region, and it should be a great concern.
Right.
We should, Mr. Zardari, and this was referred to by Mr. Manmohan Singh as well, that a regional solution, a regional approach to the problem. And the problem is Afghanistan. End game is ending.
Right.
It will be moving towards an end, maybe earlier than anticipated. So what will be the future? The void created by the exit of ISAF and NATO forces, who will fill it? Will India and Pakistan be fighting a proxy war? Or will they be joining their strategy, joining their forces to stabilize Afghanistan along with other states of the region? I mean, Mr. Zardari have proposed, he has proposed to the Prime Minister of India that let us sort out this mess together. And I think the message is taken very well. Then, of course, there was the issue of, okay, what is doable, let us do Sir Creek. And I would raise another issue after the death of 135 Pakistani soldiers in Siachen.
Right.
The now greater focus in Pakistani media is today on that these soldiers have not been rescued. And there is no hope for anyone being rescued alive.
Yeah, that's right.
So what I want to raise the issue before the panel, that why are we in Siachen? Why should we be staying on there?
Absolutely. Mr. Alam,
we must be withdrawing, both India and Pakistan must withdraw from Siachen.
Absolutely, Mr. Alam, that's a very key issue which you have raised. We will come back to it, we'll discuss it further. But what has been noticed, you know, when I was going through some of the Pakistani media reports and Pakistani newspapers, as you rightly pointed out, there is less hype about the visit in Pakistani media than there is about in India. Let me come to Dilip Cherian. Dilip, you know, if you saw the morning newspapers today, Indian newspapers, at least the English newspaper, and even some of the Hindi newspapers, the skepticism is very evident. The enthusiasm which was seen about by the coverage, but you could see that there is a hell of a lot of skepticism about this visit, in the sense that everybody is pointing towards what PM said to Zardari as far as terrorism and Hafiz Saeed is concerned. So that skepticism doesn't go away so easily, right?
You know, there are two aspects to this. One is clearly with the visit being in India, it's natural that Indian media would make a much bigger story out of it. Okay, it's also a bit of a silly season kind of story because we've just had army stories and all kinds of other stories. And now this provides a different, a totally different kind of direction to go into, as it were. Talking of skepticism which you raised, I think the skepticism has got to do with the fact that expectations that this is going to be a kind of catch him by the throat and get to the issues. It wasn't meant to be that kind of a discussion, in my view. And I think Prime Minister Manmohan Singh knows the limitations that he is working with within the halls of diplomacy. Absolutely. So he's not going to sort of expect to jump over those, one. And the other, in addition, he also knows that his own government, Manmohan's government here, also recognizes that it has its own limitations and its own sort of priorities. So it's necessary to make a certain bunch of noises for domestic consumption, but that's not going to be the stuff that the media is going to accept, that's all they could say. They want to go much, they want to hype it up much higher.
Mr. Nihal Singh, you have been you have been there, you've done everything, you've seen everything. In these kind of situations, especially in, say, yesterday's meetings, after the meetings are over, say, how does the government and the Foreign Office look at this meeting? See, if you see today's headlines of newspapers, it is evident that it is the Foreign Office briefing which has brought in this kind of headlines and this kind of focus on a particular issue, which is Hafizai, terrorism and all. So you think the Indian government, the Foreign Office, was more interested in catering to the domestic constituency of, showing that we are tough on terrorism and we are tough on Hafizai, and actually underplaying the other positives which must have emerged, which has emerged from these meetings?
Well, obviously. I think that is absolutely plain for everybody to see, that they were playing to the domestic constituency because, yes, of course, the BJP, the main opposition party, has been saying, we must do this and we must tell them that they have to do something about the Mumbai tragedy and so on, and the prosecutions and so on. So it was very much for the domestic audience.
Right.
But I do believe, and my sources tell me, that it was a much broader and more positive atmosphere during the talks. And apart from these issues which had to be brought up by India, I think the prospect was of looking ahead a little.
Yes.
At what we can do to further the ties, with skepticism, which is obvious. I mean, one has to have that, because after all, it's a weak civilian government in a still army-dominated environment.
Right.
So we realize those limitations, but be that as it may, I think there was a recognition that here was some chance to break the ice.
But if you see if we see the newspapers and the television channels, those positives which you spoke about, those atmosphere of much better pleasantness than what we would draw conclusions from the newspaper headlines, has prevailed. But Mr. Ghoshal, let me bring you in. But these things have taken the background, and terrorism and Hafizai has taken the foreground. But you think, as Mr. Nihal Singh was pointing out, whatever has happened in the meeting is a more positive outcome. You think this should take the peace process forward?
Actually,
or is it just going to remain one of those days when the two leaders met, good things were said, bad things also were said in both sides, and that's it?
You mentioned about the trust deficit.
Yes.
Now, the trust deficit cannot be narrowed or removed overnight. There has to be a continuous process of engagement.
Right.
And one of the best way to manage conflicts between two countries is to engage.
Right.
So this could be just one attempt, and overnight one cannot expect everything to be resolved in one day. But from my point of view, I think the relationship between the two countries have to be viewed also within the context of certain stakes emanating in both the countries.
Right.
You have to create a constituency in each of these countries, like in Pakistan or in India, which develops a stake in the sustenance of the relationship. And that, until and unless that stake emerges, I think whatever meetings take place, that will only add to a few news value, but I think it won't contribute to any enhancement or deepening of, or at least removal of some of these misunderstandings.
Okay. We will continue this discussion. We need to go into a short break now. Please keep watching. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. We are discussing the Pakistan President Zardari's visit to India and asking the question, has there been any reduction in the trust deficit between the two countries? Let me go to Mr. Imtiaz Alam. Mr. Alam, if you can hear me?
Yes.
Mr. Alam, you heard what the guests have said. See, the important question now is that in Pakistan, do you think that this trust deficit which has been there between the two countries, is there any evidence of it being reduced following this visit? Do you see that? Do you see that in the media? Do you see that among the people, or among the diplomats, among the politicians?
You see that we have a long history of suspicion and wars and animosity, which is a bad history. We should be forgetting that history and getting over it. There are some very positive developments, perhaps which can't be seen with adversarial eyes. Or in a state of Cold War kind of thing which prevails in the subcontinent.
Mr. Alam, I just wanted to bring to your notice some of the newspaper reports which I have seen from Pakistan. They are they seem to be more positive than what we see in the Indian newspapers. How do you see? So how do you see this?
That all the Mr. Nawaz Sharif has welcomed, despite very bitter opposition to the regime of Mr. Zardari and Gilani.
Okay.
That he has welcomed the president's visit.
But Imran Khan seems to have a problem.
And similarly, Mr. Fazlur Rahman, the leader of the largest Deobandi organization,
right,
with a mass appeal in some parts of Pakistan, he is also welcomed.
Right.
Awami National, I mean the parties in the parliament all are for peace with India and better relations with India and resolution of disputes through dialogue. I think there is a larger consensus in the Pakistani parliament. And moreover, the people are now fed up with this because there is a lot on Pakistani plate to sort out. For example, the terrorism, the law and order situation, the economy, the energy crisis, and people want their government to focus on these issues.
Right.
And what is important to note is, and you can check it with your high-ups, you can call Mr. Chidambaram.
Right.
I'm asking this from Mr. Chidambaram. Is cross-border taking place at the moment? No. Cross-border is totally stopped. And this has been decided by Pakistan Army that no more cross-border, and they are containing these people.
That's very interesting.
And war is going on in Pakistan's vast areas against these terrorists. Of course, there is a conflict between America going on, a tussle going on between America and Pakistan.
Right.
The Pakistani establishment wants its space to expand towards South Asia. That's why this trade was allowed.
Okay.
Otherwise, this trade would not have been allowed. And India must grab this opportunity.
Absolutely.
There have been moments that sometime when India was prepared, Pakistan was not prepared.
Right,
when Pakistan was prepared, India was not prepared.
Absolutely.
And we missed such opportunities.
Several opportunities.
I would say that despite all what's going on in Pakistan, Pakistan is perhaps Pakistan's major stakeholders, establishment included, are now inclined to have a good handshake with India.
Absolutely. Okay, Mr. Alam, we'll come back to you. Let me come back to my guests in the studio. We'll come back to you. Please stay on. Dilip, it's very interesting what Mr. Alam is saying, that the problems within Pakistan, several kinds of problems, but Pakistanis want peace with India. And this is evident. But we are still taking, we are not still ready to take those massive steps or major steps. Don't you think that is what comes out of the way it's projected in the media, at least, these meetings?
If what Mr. Alam is saying is right, then clearly both the Pakistani political establishment and the army seems to have got it right this time in terms of cross-border terrorism.
Absolutely.
If indeed that is the fact on the ground.
Right.
In which case, it's India which will be found lacking.
Absolutely.
And the Indian Foreign Office needs to recognize that this may be an opportunity to take this much further. The problem, however, is that as a government, we seem to be burdened by a plethora of other issues. And therefore, maybe this is not being kept on the front burner. And the only thing that's kept on the front burner, as Mr. Nihal Singh said, for reasons of a domestic sort of uptake, is the issue of suspicion, terrorism, and demands.
Absolutely, Mr. Singh. What Mr. Alam is saying, if even 50% of it is in the sense that there is no more cross-border, the army has given a direction. Virtually, that's what he is saying, that there should be no more cross-border thing. Do you see this, this being seen in the Indian Foreign Office, among the Indian establishment? Have they come to realize this? Will they accept this and move forward? Or is there, as Dilip was saying, that still the suspicions and the distrust?
No, I think the main point is one has to confirm that on the ground, whether it's true or not. Given the history, the long history of what's been happening, we have to confirm that to begin with. As far as the circumstances of the talks are concerned and the outcome of the talks and what it will portend for the future, I think that very much depends also upon the Pakistani milieu.
Right.
Because after all, we realize that you have a weak civilian government which is trying to assert itself.
But what Mr. Alam said is very important. He said that the entire political establishment cutting across lines, Nawaz Sharif and Jamaat-e-Uzla, all those people seem to have welcomed the move of Zardari to come to India and hold talks, which is a very positive development.
No,
but of course, Imran Khan is the only negative voice there. He's the one. But he's saying that it was not right on the part of Zardari to visit India when Siachen happened.
Well, it happened when everything was prepared. So he couldn't cancel it. I think it would have been worse if he had cancelled it. Well, that is a separate issue. But in basic terms, I think what we have to realize is that Pakistan's political position, is a very complex one today.
Absolutely.
And it's evolving.
Sir, before I just want you to flag this issue, because Mr. Alam raised this issue, and he would, in the context of what has happened in Siachen in the last 2 days, that more than 135 Pakistani soldiers have got buried in the avalanche and all that. So, you think, as Mr. Alam said, this is the right atmosphere, and is this the right time for India and Pakistan to take a relook again at its forces in Siachen, and is this the time to make that big move to withdraw from there?
I would welcome it. I would certainly welcome it, because I think it's a useless battle.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Mr. Ghoshal.
What Mr. Alam said about the broad spectrum of the population supporting Zardari's visit, but this could be, all the other civilian parties have supported this. This could be again a civilian attempt to assert its authority vis-a-vis the army. So I think in order to make this visit more effective and to broad-base this kind of engagements, I think there has to be a meeting between the army personnel, between the chiefs of the army in Pakistan as well as the Indian army. So I think it has to be the dialogue and the engagements have to be just not between the civilian groups, but also between the military people, in order to make it more effective.
Let me get back to Mr. Alam. Mr. Alam, we are running short of time. So, the Indian mind is still a little skeptical about, some of the things which you have said. It is evident here, and it will be evident in the media also. So, you think the civilian establishment and the army, the problems between the civilian establishment and the army, is that the reason why all the civilian parties have come together, or is it something far beyond that, or is it something more positive?
You see, that civilians had realized that conflict between India and Pakistan is not good for democracy.
Has the army realized it?
No, yes. An army is in no mood to enter politics. The second point is that you must have noted the meeting between the President, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Army Chief before Mr. Zardari left for Delhi. That was a message that, okay, everybody's on board. And as he came back, you have seen the papers that except for very extremist fringe, nobody opposed the visit and everybody welcomed it.
Right.
And I may tell you that, okay, you must talk to your army chief and you must talk to your RA chief, you must talk to your defense minister, you must talk to your interior minister, whether cross-border infiltration is taking place at the moment or not.
Okay.
I will say that it's not, I have been opposed to this infiltration. I have taken flag here opposing this. Okay, don't use violence. Violence cannot be a method to solve issues.
Absolutely.
But I am saying the peacenik in Pakistan, Mr. Imtiaz is saying that there is no cross-border. And there are bigger, and please don't make Hafiz Saeed a hero. Americans, behind putting up the bounty on his head, have in fact made him a hero suddenly. And India, by emphasizing just, this is a bigger issue than Hafiz Saeed.
No, but Hafiz Saeed
is a much bigger threat than many Hafiz Saeeds put together.
Anyway, Mr. Alam, I think we have completely run short of time. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us and giving us that perspective from Pakistan. And it's some of the things which you have said is, very important, and I hope the Indian government also takes note of it. The fact that you are saying that the cross-border terrorism is no more there, and you're as much as saying that it's an official policy of the Pakistan government and the army, and it's a very, very positive thing to hear. But we'll have to check it on the ground, as our guests in the studio are saying. Let me come to Dilip. Dilip, last words to you. So you think, from what Mr. Alam is saying, and you think, so this, if it is proved on the ground that this cross-border terrorism is a thing of the past, this should really improve the trust deficit between reduce the trust deficit between the two countries.
Only if India can close the chapter of the extremely ghastly Bombay tragedy. If you want to move forward from there, you have to take a step forward, and you have to make sure that while you recognize that that is still an eventuality or a possibility in some point of time in the future, that this is a good time to take things to a point where you can ensure that it can't be repeated.
Absolutely. So we have completely run out of time. There are certain positive developments, despite the fact that the Indian media has shown the talks in very skeptical light. And what we heard from our guest from Pakistan today, Mr. Imtiaz Alam, is a very heartening news. But if it is proved right on the ground, I'm sure this will lead to a great amount of reduction in the trust deficit between the two countries. We will keep watching the developments. Please, meanwhile, let me thank all my guests, Mr. S.Nihal Singh, Mr. Ghoshal, Mr. Dilip Cherian, and also Mr. Imtiaz Alam. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on The Big Picture.